Saju, and the Golden Dragon Scroll. A boy and a legendary dragon must unite to defy an unstoppable army and shape the fate of an ancient land. By Mac Caldo. Published by Phoenix Publishing in 2026. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Whispers in Bamboo. The bamboo spoke before Saju did. It always did. At dawn, a low, hollow percussion, as the stalks swayed against one another, filling the grove with sound the way a temple fills with incense. Saju had trained here every morning for 3 years, and he had learned to listen to it. The bamboo told you when the wind was shifting. It told you when something was moving through the grass at the grove's edge. It told you, if you were paying attention, when you were alone and when you were not. This morning he was alone. He settled into his stance, both feet planted wide, wooden practice sword raised to his shoulder. The mist sat low across the ground, clinging to his ankles, and the first pale light of the sun had just begun to color the eastern sky, the deep orange of a dying ember. He breathed in. He breathed out. Then he moved. Hakata began slowly, as Master Ran had taught him, each motion deliberate, each transition weighted with intention. Strike, pivot, lock. The wooden blade cut arcs through the morning air, and the mist curled away from it like something living. Saju did not rush. That was the lesson he had struggled longest to learn. That speed was not the point. Precision was the point. Precision was what survived. He completed the first sequence and paused, chest barely rising, listening to the bamboo. Then he began again, faster this time. His father had stood in this same grove. Saju did not know this as a fact. No one had told him so, but he felt it as certainly as he felt the weight of the practice sword in his hands. His father, Kenji Ishigawa, had died before Saju was old enough to ask questions. What remained was a name, a katana mounted above the hearth, that Saju was not yet permitted to touch, and a feeling, persistent and wordless, that something was expected of him. He had never been able to name the feeling properly. He only knew it woke before he did. He pushed into the third sequence, faster still, and this time let himself go. A practice sword became something else in his hands, not wood but wind, not weight but intention. He turned and struck and turned again, moving through the forms, until they stopped being forms and became something closer to instinct. A bead of sweat traced his jaw. His breath came steady and hard. The bamboo clattered overhead as the morning wind rose, and for a moment Saju felt something rare and good. Like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was made to do. He finished the sequence with a downward strike, held the position, sword extended, weight forward, eyes level, and let the silence settle back around him. Then someone laughed. You were muttering again. Saju straightened and turned. Adeo was leaning against a bamboo stalk at the grove's edge, arms crossed, grinning the way he always grinned, like he had arrived just in time to witness your most embarrassing moment and intended to remember it forever. He was a year older than Saju and half a head taller, which he considered deeply important. I was not muttering, Saju said. Your lips were moving. I was counting the sequences. You were muttering. Hideo pushed off the stalk and walked into the grove, his own practice sword tucked under his arm. I could hear you from the path. You sounded like an old priest. Saju lowered his weapon. You are late. I am early. You are unreasonably earlier. Hideo fell into stance beside him, his posture easy and loose. Hideo had natural talent, the kind that made discipline seem optional. He was skilled enough to believe he could afford to be lazy about it. Saju had never had that problem. He could not afford laziness. He was not entirely sure why he felt that so strongly, but he did. They ran the sequences together, side by side in the rising light, the bamboo clattering softly around them. 2 more trainees arrived before long. Yori, who was small and meticulous, and always brought rice in a cloth pouch to eat afterward, and Daisuke, who was large and slow to anger and devastating, once he finally was. The four of them moved through the forms together, their wooden swords tracing the same arcs in the mist. This was the world Saju knew. This grove, these friends, this village tucked into the valley below with its tiled rooftops, and its cooking smoke, and its rice paddies spreading out green and still toward the hills. He had never been far from it. He had never wanted to be. When they stopped to rest, Yori produced his rice, and Hideo immediately reached for it without asking, which was so predictable that no one reacted. Saju sat with his back against a bamboo stalk and looked up through the canopy. The sky had gone pale blue now, the orange burned away. Somewhere in the village below, he could hear the first sounds of the day beginning: a cart on stone, a door sliding open, someone calling to someone else in a voice too distant to understand. He should have felt peaceful. He usually did, after morning training. But something had been sitting at the edge of his thoughts for days now, vague and persistent as a stone in a shoe. The elders had been meeting more frequently. He had noticed it, the way you notice a change in weather before you can see the clouds, in the way adults looked at one another when they thought young people were not watching, in the small silences that opened up in the middle of ordinary conversations, and then closed again, quickly, like hands hiding something. Saju did not know what they were hiding, not yet. He looked down at his practice sword, resting across his knees, and thought about his father's katana above the hearth, the one he was not yet permitted to touch. He wondered how much longer that would last. The morning practice ended when Elder Tanaka appeared at the edge of the grove. He said nothing. He simply stood there with his hands folded inside his robe, his face arranged into the careful blankness that elders wore when they were carrying something they did not wish to share. The trainees saw him and stopped mid-form, instinctively straightening. Even Daisuke, who complained loudly about every interruption to their schedule, went quiet. "Training is finished for this morning," Elder Tanaka said. "Return to your homes. Rest and eat well." Hideo exchanged a glance with Saju. Rest and eat well was the kind of instruction given before a festival or a ceremony, not on an ordinary morning in late autumn, with nothing yet celebrated and nothing yet planned. "Elder," Hideo began carefully, "has something?" "Go home, Hideo." The gentleness in Tanaka's voice was somehow worse than sharpness would have been. "All of you." They went. Yori and Daisuke fell into easy conversation as they walked back along the path toward the village, already half forgetting the oddness of it. Hideo caught Seiju's arm before they reached the first gate. "You saw them last night too," Hideo said quietly. It was not a question. The elders, yes, and again this morning, before practice. Elder Mori was with him, and Elder Sato. Hideo paused. "Elder Sato has not left his house in 3 weeks. His back, everyone says." Saju looked back toward the bamboo grove. Elder Tanaka had not followed them. He had turned and was walking in the opposite direction, toward the wide hall at the center of the village where the council met during planting seasons and years of drought and the deaths of important men. "I want to know what they are saying," Saju said. Hideo stared at him. "Saju, I am not asking you to come." Hideo was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you get caught, I will tell everyone it was entirely your idea." "It was entirely my idea." "Good. Then, we understand each other." They waited until Yori and Daisuke disappeared around the bend. Then they doubled back along the narrow maintenance path that ran behind the storehouse, pressing close to the wall, and circled around to the eastern side of the council hall. The hall was old, built when Saju's grandfather had been young, and its eastern wall had never quite settled flush against the foundation. There was a gap there, low to the ground, where sound traveled with surprising clarity. Saju had discovered it years ago during a particularly boring harvest ceremony. He had never used it for anything more consequential than that. He crouched down beside it now. Hideo folded himself beside him. The voices inside were already raised. "Cannot simply wait for confirmation that never comes." That was Elder Mori, his voice tight with something that was not quite anger, but lived close to it. "Our last message from the coast arrived 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks of silence. Silence is not an army. Elder Sato, slower and more measured, the way old pain made people careful with their breath. We have heard rumors before. Every generation hears rumors. These are not harvest rumors. A third voice, Elder Tanaka's, quieter than the others, which somehow made it more serious. The western villages are not merely afraid. 3 of them are already gone. The word hung there. Gone. Saju felt Hideo's shoulder tighten against his. Mongol advance scouts were confirmed at the coastal settlements before the silence fell. Elder Tanaka continued. Whatever happened to the western villages, we cannot afford to assume it was weather or sickness or coincidence. The Khan's forces have crossed water before. They will cross it again. Then we send for the prefecture garrison, Elder Sato said. We send runners. We request soldiers. And wait 3 weeks for an answer that may not come? Elder Mori's voice cracked slightly at the edges. This village has 83 families. We have 12 trained swords, and half of those are boys who have not yet finished their forms. Saju sat very still. He thought of Hideo and Yuri and Daisuke. He thought of the sword forms they had practiced that morning, the precise and careful geometries of movement, how orderly everything had felt. How small that felt now against the word gone. Then say plainly what you are suggesting, Elder Sato said. There was a long pause. When Elder Tanaka spoke again, his voice had dropped, and Saju had to press closer to the gap to hear him. I am suggesting we consider whether the old stories have any use to us now. Tanaka, I am not a superstitious man. You know me well enough to know that. But I have read the same records you have, Sato. The scroll's last verified location was the Fukami Monastery, 60 years ago. Before the monks dispersed, Saju barely breathed. He did not know what scroll Elder Tanaka meant. He did not know what old stories were being weighed against real armies and real silence from the coast. But the word scroll landed in his chest with a weight he did not understand. The Golden Dragon Scroll, Elder Mori said, and then said nothing else, as though the name itself was something to be treated carefully. A legend, Elder Sato said flatly. All legends begin somewhere, and most of them end as stories told to children. You are proposing that we state this village's survival on a piece of mythology? I am proposing that we be honest with ourselves about what we have and what we do not have. Elder Tanaka's voice was steady and quiet and very tired. We do not have enough swords. We do not have enough time. If the scroll exists, and if even a portion of what is written about it is true, then the question is not whether we should pursue it. The question is whether we have the courage to try. Silence followed that felt different from the ones before it, heavier, more considered. If we send someone, Elder Mori said slowly, it cannot be one of the garrison. We cannot spare trained fighters, and a military party would draw attention we cannot afford. No, Elder Tanaka agreed. It would need to be someone capable enough to travel safely, young enough to move without notice, and someone who understands exactly what they are carrying, what the purpose is. What comes home with them matters, but so does what they carry in their heart when they leave. Saju did not move. Something in the way Elder Tanaka had phrased it, what they carry in their heart, felt less like a description and more like the beginning of a question being slowly turned in his direction. We decide nothing today, Elder Sato said finally, his voice dry and unwilling. We send the runners to the prefecture. We wait, carefully, and we prepare what defenses we can with what we have. And we revisit this matter in 7 days. 7 days, Elder Mori repeated, with a tone that made clear he considered this generous to the point of recklessness. Chairs moved, feet found the floor. The council session was ending. Saju pulled back from the wall and straightened, his legs stiff from crouching. Hideo was already on his feet, his face arranged into an expression Saju recognized, the careful blankness of someone processing something larger than they had expected. They did not speak until they had moved well away from the hall and reached the open ground near the well. Mongols, Hideo said, testing the word. Yes, and a scroll. The Golden Dragon Scroll, Saju said. Even saying the name felt strange in his mouth, like pronouncing something in a language he did not quite speak yet. Hideo looked at him for a long moment. Saju, whatever you are already thinking, I am not thinking anything. This was not entirely true. He was thinking of his father's katana, standing clean and untouchable in the corner of his home. He was thinking of 83 families and 12 swords and 3 villages already gone. He was thinking of Elder Tanaka's voice, patient and deliberate, describing someone young enough to move without notice and old enough to understand the weight of what they carried. He was thinking that some things felt inevitable, not because they were easy, but because they were necessary. "Go eat," Saju told Hideo. "I need to think." Hideo searched his face, then nodded slowly and walked away. Saju stood alone by the well, listening to the wind move through the distant bamboo, and felt the shape of something enormous beginning to form on the horizon of his life. The elders had not finished. Saju realized it, and we heard Elder Mori's voice drop even lower, the kind of low that meant whatever came next was meant to travel beyond that room at all. He pressed himself back against the outer wall of the council hall, barely breathing. A torchlight inside painted amber strips through the latticed screens, and if anyone glanced out, he would be seen immediately. But no one glanced out. They were all looking at one another. "Dragon scroll," Elder Mori said. Just those 2 words, and the room seemed to tighten. Saju's pulse quickened. "You cannot be serious," said a voice he recognized as Elder Tanaka, the oldest of the council. The man rarely spoke in the open sessions, saving his words the way a farmer saves water through a dry summer. "The Golden Dragon Scroll is a story told to children. All stories told to children begin somewhere," Mori replied, "and this one begins in the Ishikawa bloodline." Saju stopped breathing entirely. "The records are clear," Mori continued. "When the last great threat came to these lands, 3 generations passed. It was an Ishikawa who carried the scroll out of the northern shrine and delivered it to the Dragon's Gate. I have seen the document with my own eyes. The binding between the scroll and that family is not legend. It is recorded fact." A long silence followed. Somewhere inside, wood shifted in a fire pit, and the sound of it seemed very loud. "Even if it exists," said another elder, a woman named Cho, whose voice was always careful and measured, "finding it would require crossing the Kira Mountains. Through territory the Mongols are already pressing toward. Yes, we be sending someone to their death. We may be sending 83 families to their death if we do nothing," Mori said. Saju felt the words land against his chest like stones, thrown from a height. He pressed one hand flat against the outer wall to steady himself. The wood grain was rough under his palm, real and solid in a way that everything else suddenly was not. He had heard of the Golden Dragon Scroll before, the way you heard of things when you were young and sitting near the fire while adults talked. A legendary text, some said. A treaty written in the language of heaven, said others. A weapon, a key, a map to something that could not be described in ordinary words. The stories changed depending on who was telling them, but one thing remained constant in every version. The scroll was said to carry the power to turn the tide of a war that could not otherwise be won. He had always assumed it was exactly what Elder Tanaka said, a story told to children. Apparently, Elder Mori did not agree. "The boy," Mori said, and his voice was so deliberate that Saju's skin prickled. "Saju Ishikawa. He is nearly of age. He has completed 3 cycles of training. There is something in him, you must have all seen it. A quality that is not yet named, but is not nothing." "He is 15, said Tanaka. "He is Ishikawa," Mori replied simply. Cho's voice came again, quieter now. "Even if we believed the scroll was real, and even if the binding holds true, we cannot send a boy alone into the mountains with the Mongols moving south." "No," Mori agreed. "Not alone, and not yet ordered. There are preparations to consider, conversations to be had." A pause. "But the question on this council tonight is not whether to send him. It is whether the scroll is real, and whether, if it is real, we have any right to pretend otherwise while our people sleep without walls." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Saju stepped back from the wall. 1 step, then 2, moving on the pads of his feet, the way he had been trained, distributing weight evenly, making no sound. He retreated until the voices became a murmur, and then until the murmur became nothing, and then he was standing alone in the outer courtyard with the cold night air on his face and the stars overhead, and the faint sound of bamboo shifting somewhere beyond the village walls. His thoughts were moving too fast to hold any single one of them. The Golden Dragon Scroll. Not a story. Recorded fact, Mori had said. Seen with his own eyes. And the binding. The Ishikawa bloodline. He looked down at his hands. They were a trainee's hands, rough from practice swords and rope work, nicked in small places from 100 small errors in form. They did not look like the hands of someone connected to something ancient and legendary. They looked like the hands of a 15-year-old boy who sometimes burned his rice and fell asleep during evening readings. But Elder Mori's voice had been entirely certain. Saju walked slowly toward the far edge of the courtyard, where a low stone wall separated the village center from the path that led toward the training ground. He sat on it, not because he decided to, but because his legs requested it quietly, and he obliged. The Kira Mountains were visible on clear days, a dark serrated line against the northern sky. He had always thought of them the way you thought of things that existed at a comfortable distance, real but not relevant, a kind of geography you acknowledged and then set aside. The Mongols were pressing toward them, Cho had said. 3 villages already gone, 83 families sleeping without walls. He pressed his hands together in his lap and tried to think the way his trainmaster, Kobe, had taught him. Clear the noise first, then look at what remains. What remained was this. If the scroll existed, and if it could do what the story said, and if his family's blood carried some genuine connection to it, then not seeking it was a choice just as much as seeking it was. Ignorance was not neutrality. It was simply a decision made quietly, in the dark, with the consequences arriving later. He thought of the families in this village, the papermaker's daughter who always waved when he passed, the old fisherman who had lost 2 fingers to a net accident and still worked every morning without complaint, the children who chased each other through the market lanes in the early afternoon, too young to understand what the word invasion meant. They did not need to understand it. That was the point. They did not need to carry it. He would carry it. The thought arrived with a steadiness that surprised him. Not courage exactly, because there was still a cold, animal fear sitting in his stomach that had not moved since he first heard Mori's voice say Mongol. But beneath the fear, something firmer, a floor. He did not know yet what seeking the scroll would mean, whether it was possible, whether he would survive the mountains, whether the whole thing was still legend dressed up in old documents. He did not know any of it, but he knew the questions were now his to answer. He stood up from the wall, straightened his jacket, and looked north toward the dark line of the Kira Mountains. Tomorrow he would train. He would be present, disciplined, and give nothing away. He would watch Elder Mori's face and listen for what was not being said. And he would begin, quietly, and without announcing it to anyone, to believe that the Golden Dragon Scroll was real. The courtyard was empty now. Saju sat where he had settled after leaving the shadows of the meeting hall, his back against the stone well at the courtyard's center. The other trainees had gone inside long ago, their laughter fading like smoke. Torches along the hall's eaves burned low, and the bamboo beyond the perimeter fence whispered in a language he was only beginning to understand. He pressed his palms flat against the cool stone of the well's rim and looked up at the sky. Stars filled it from edge to edge, dense and indifferent, the same sky that arched over the Kira Mountains to the north. The same sky, he supposed, that arched over the Mongol war camps wherever they had made them. That thought sat in his chest like a stone. He had always known, in the abstract way that boys know things, that the world beyond the village was dangerous. Master Ren had told them so in training, not with alarm, but with the steady certainty of a man who had seen enough. You do not become a samurai because the world is peaceful. You become one because it is not. Saju had nodded along with the others, feeling the rightness of the words without truly feeling their weight. He felt the weight now. The elders' voices moved through his memory again, low and urgent. Elder Mori words had been plain enough. His scroll exists, and the Ishikawa blood is the only key. He turned those words over the way he might turn a blade, examining the edge. His blood. His family name. Not a coincidence the elders had treated carelessly, but something old, something written, it seemed, long before his birth. He had never thought much about his family name. Ishikawa. It was simply what he was called. His father had carried it before him, and his father's father before that, stretching back into the part of history that lived in stories rather than memory. He knew his grandfather had been a samurai of some reputation, though the details were hazy. His mother spoke of it rarely, and when she did, something careful came into her expression, as though the subject required handling. Now he found himself wondering what she knew. The thought surprised him. He had always considered home and training as to separate worlds, his mother's gentle routines on one side, the dojo's hard discipline on the other. But tonight those worlds had shifted closer together, and the gap between them suddenly seemed thin. He would not tell her what he had heard. Not yet. The elders had not told him, which meant they were not ready to. He understood enough about duty to know that acting ahead of a proper telling was its own kind of dishonor. He would wait. He would train harder. He would be ready when they finally opened that door and asked him to walk through it. That much at least he could control. What he could not control was the fear. He was not ashamed of it, Master Ren had said that too, once, in a quieter moment after the others had filed out the dojo. Fear is not the enemy of a samurai. Cowardice is. Fear tells you the danger is real. Cowardice tells you to look away. Saju had written that down that evening, pressed charcoal to paper until the words were firm, and read them back to himself until they felt solid. He had not known then that he would need them so soon. He took a slow breath and let it out. The bamboo shifted. Somewhere in the Kira Mountains, if the elders were right, there was a scroll that had been waiting for centuries. He tried to picture it, a chamber of stone, torchlight on ancient silk, a dragon rendered in gold so fine it seemed to breathe. He did not know if that image was imagination or something older pressing through him. Either way, it pulled. That single fragment he had caught, the one that had lodged in him like a splinter. The one who carries the dragon's name must first find the dragon's door. He did not know what it meant. He did not know where the door was, or what carrying the dragon's name had to do with being in Nishigawa. But the phrase would not leave him, circling the way a hawk circles before it dives, patient and deliberate. He would have to find out, not by asking the elders directly, not yet. The village had a records room behind the shrine, 3 walls of shelves packed with scrolls and bound histories that no one under 30 was expected to read. Master Ren had pointed it out once as they passed, offhand, the way adults point to things they assume children will ignore. Saju had noted it at the time and stored the fact away without knowing why. He thought he knew why now. He pushed himself up from the well, his legs stiff from sitting still too long. The torches gutter as a breeze moved through. He looked once toward the meeting hall, dark and quiet, the elders long dispersed, and once toward the dojo where the others slept. 2 worlds. He was standing precisely between them. He thought of his village. The rice paper lanterns in the market at dusk. The smell of the forge on cold mornings. His mother's hands folding cloth in the low autumn light. Small things, the kind of things that did not seem worth naming until something threatened to take them. They were worth protecting. Every ordinary, unremarkable piece of them. That was not a new thought. But tonight was no longer abstract. Tonight it had edges. Saju Ishigawa walked back toward the dojo, shoulders straight, the star-fixed sky above him, and the whispering bamboo all around. He did not feel brave. He felt something steadier than brave, a quiet decision settling into his bones like heat after a long cold. Tomorrow he would find the records room. Whatever the dragon's door was, whatever his bloodline carried, he intended to understand it. He owed the village that much. He owed himself that much. The bamboo whispered on, and he let it. Thank you for watching our story. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for the next chapter.